a city of 50,000 people. No refrigeration, no morgue, and the cemetery filled up sometime around 1200. So where exactly did medieval London put its dead? The answer involves a lot of bones, some very creative architecture, and at least one priest who definitely regretted his job. This isn't a niche problem. By the 1300s, Paris, London, and Cologne each had more corpses than ground to put them in. The math was brutal. Medieval urban death rates meant a city buried roughly 1 in 30 residents every single year. That's 1,600 bodies annually in a city the size of a modern mid-sized suburb, with soil that fills up, with plague years that multiplied that number tenfold. Someone had to solve this, and the solutions they came up with are genuinely unhinged. Let's start in Paris, around 1185. The Saints-Innocents Cemetery had been the city's primary burial ground for nearly 10 centuries. 10 centuries of bodies, stacked sometimes 6 layers deep. The smell in summer was reportedly detectable from 3 streets away. Residents near the walls complained constantly. One account describes market vendors abandoning their stalls because the stench was killing business. The solution? Build a wall. Specifically, build covered arcades around the cemetery perimeter, stack the excavated bones inside them, and just keep going. Saints-Innocents eventually held an estimated 2 million bodies. 2 million, in an area roughly the size of a city block. Which brings us to Charnel houses. If you've never heard of Charnel house, congratulations, you've been living a blessed life. A Charnel house was essentially a bone warehouse attached to a church. When a grave needed reusing, which happened constantly, usually after 5 to 10 years, the sexton would dig up whatever was left, carry the bones to the Charnel house, and stack them neatly if he was having a good day. The Charnel house at St. Paul's Cathedral in London reportedly held over 30,000 skulls at its peak. Clergy held services literally next to walls of human skulls. Parishioners walked past them every Sunday. Nobody apparently thought this was weird. It was just infrastructure. Now, the Black Death changes everything. Between 1347 and 1351, Europe loses somewhere between 30 and 60% of its population. In some cities, the normal burial logistics collapse completely within weeks. In Tournai, Belgium, a monk named Gillis, who survived, wrote that the living could not keep up with the dead. Carts moved through streets at night. Bodies were loaded without ceremony. Mass graves outside city walls were dug so fast that some weren't deep enough, and dogs got into them. He wrote this down with the detachment of a man who had simply run out of horror to feel. The pits at East Smithfield in London, discovered by archaeologists in the 1980s, held at least 2,400 bodies in neat rows. Neat rows. Even in catastrophe, someone was still trying to keep it organized. And then there's the option that sounds fake but isn't. Recycling. Medieval builders used human bone as actual construction material. A church in Sedlec, Czech Republic, you might know it as the Bone Church, has a chandelier made from every bone in the human body. But less artistically, bones were ground into fertilizer, used as fill in foundations. And in at least one documented case in 14th century London, a property dispute was settled partly because a building's foundation was found to contain human remains that predated the current owner. The bones were load-bearing. Literally. Here's the part nobody talks about. The real crisis wasn't space. It was groundwater. Overcrowded urban cemeteries were leaching decomposition fluid directly into the wells that medieval cities drank from. Physicians at the time blamed bad air for the constant waves of dysentery and fever. They were wrong about the mechanism, but right about the source. The corpses were poisoning the water supply. The cities that survived long-term were the ones that, accidentally or not, moved their burial grounds upstream from their wells. Medieval cities weren't ignorant. They were just solving an impossible logistics problem in real time, with no germ theory, no urban planning, and no budget. They built bone walls and chandelier skeletons and somehow kept functioning. The next time your city complains about waste management, remember, at least your infrastructure isn't made of your grandparents. Probably. Click the next video to find out what they did with the smell.